Dat is goed gelijk. I just got to get the note right. Excuse me. Okay. Here we go. Volume. Ekluthelikona bathidendronai Lachete dio cerebromo utigatres olenoi Molete sino mai moninai foi oibon oida esimel Sete crise ocoman Hosanna di Corinta Parnasidos tas de peteras etrana maclita este elfisi inca salidos e huidru namate pini setai delfona na proona maante e on efe pon pagon. Come forth, ye muses that were allotted deep forest Helicon, loud booming Zeus, fair-armed daughters, come to celebrate your brother in songs, Phoebus of the golden hair, that over the twin peaks of this crag of Parnassus, accompanied by the famous maiden of Delphi, comes to the waters of the fair-flowing Castalian spring as he attends to the mountain oracle. This is the oldest piece of Western music for which we have practically the entire text with music and rhythm. It dates to 127 before the Common Era. Its composer's name was Athenaeus. He wrote it for the celebrations at the shrine to Apollo at Delphi, and I've seen this stone. Excuse me. I've seen this stone in the museum there, and its pentatonism sounds primitive in our ears. The last stanza refers to the battle between Apollo, the beardless, athletic, and youthful god of music, truth and prophecy, against the dragon Python. Order, action, and life against chaos, inaction, and death. Enlightenment symbol, if you like. That's the stone with the musical marks on the top. More Greece soon, but first I want to tell you about today's title, What I Believe. It's pinched from a famous essay by Bertrand Russell in 1925, and it contains these lines. My view is this: the good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. Neither love without knowledge nor knowledge without love can produce a good life. I believe, what I believe, or credo, is has become an unfamiliar genre to us. It was popular between the wars. Albert Einstein wrote one just as Hitler was coming to power, and it includes these words with which I can also identify. Although I am a typical loner in daily life, my consciousness of belonging to the invisible community of those who strive for truth, beauty, and justice keeps me from feeling isolated. As a farewell speech, the credo is unusual, I agree, but for me it is a moment of introspection, of reconnecting my inner with my outer life. And that connection is by no means straightforward. On the one hand, what I believe is widely seen as an obstacle to our work as social scientists, which is simply to discover the reality out there. We must get rid of the subjective I. Our own citizenship research program, for example, which ventured out yesterday and today into uncharted pre-colonial territories, still hasn't really resolved the question often put to it, aren't you forcing your own democratic beliefs down the throats of others who might have different beliefs? This is positivism, and I think it bedevils the social sciences. On the other hand, precisely our silence about what we personally believe might have helped to nurture a flourishing moral relativism that says, whatever you believe, if it works for you, hey, go for it. This way lies the post-truth right-wing populism for which we liberals have a lot to answer for. Today's credo is certainly not what I have always believed, and it is probably more like what I think I believe today, or actually it's just 3 books I've read recently that helped me a lot. It was the ancient Greek philosophers who first sensed the problem that we are talking about. A very early Greek thinker said philosophy was diving into yourself. If you do that, wrote Heraclitus, you will find that the human self is much bigger than just one body. It is coextensive with a world that far transcends the individual. Philosophy was a personal activity. What they called philosophy, we would today call both doing science and becoming generally cultivated, living the examined life. And we still can't do without that insight. Jeder sei auf seine Art ein Grieche, aber sei es, wrote Goethe. Everyone should be a Greek after their own fashion, but they should be one. As scholars, we describe our most basic beliefs with the word theory. This is the scholarly what I believe. Theory thus contrasts with technical knowledge, such as how to fix a leaking tap. It was Plato who gave that word its present meaning. In the opening chapter of The Republic, he tells a story about Socrates, his teacher. We find Socrates in the harbor near Athens. He's gone there to witness a sacred rite for a certain goddess. It is quite spectacular. Involving horses and torches at night. And afterwards, some distant friends accost him, and they spend the rest of the book discussing the ideal political community. Watching that rite and then talking about it is called Theoria. Theoria is originally, therefore, the act of traveling to observe a sacred, perhaps even ecstatic ritual, and traveling back to one's community to talk about what it all meant. And Plato used that act as a metaphor for doing philosophy. Theoria comes back again later in the Republic in the famous fable about the cave. There's the cave in a picture by Sanderman. Inside it, people are chained to the wall in such a way that they can only see the shadows of things happening outside. One of them, the philosopher, leaves the dark cave, becomes a theoros, that is, a person doing theoria, and the philosopher contemplates the light-drenched world outside and comes to a rational understanding of it. Mathematics, astronomy, marveling at the regularities that are as beautiful as music. And then the philosopher returns back into the cave to complete the theoria by trying to persuade the others to come out of the darkness. Theoria has been called passionate, sympathetic contemplation, an act filled with wonder that is both personally transformative and politically relevant. Human societies are also part of that cosmos. Anthropology is the perfect theoria. Go out, observe, be amazed, feel yourself changed, come back and talk about it. Everyone will think you are nuts, just like the cave dwellers in the Republic did. And the German political philosopher Jürgen Habermas spelled out what this concept of theoria means for the social scientist today. When the philosopher views the immortal order, he cannot help bringing himself into accord with the proportions of the cosmos and reproducing them internally. He manifests these proportions, which he sees in the motions of nature and the harmonic series of music, within himself. He forms himself through mimesis, through imitation, through the soul's likening itself to the ordered motion of the cosmos. Theory enters into the conduct of life. Sadly, modern science has severed this link with the conduct of life that Theoria implies, Habermas went on. In the original Theoria, it is not the thinking subject that is the problem, as modern positivists claim, but the impure passions that live in the breast of the subject. Theoria purifies those passions by directing the rational gaze at the cosmos. Now, what is this cosmos like of which we are a part? From the Republic, we skip forward to the Roman poet Lucretius. He wrote his long poem on the nature of things in about 50 before Common Era. The book was very nearly lost forever. We know practically nothing of its author. The Christian Middle Ages copied many old books, but nearly succeeded in condemning this one to death by neglect. When a Renaissance book hunter came across just one forgotten old manuscript of it in a southern German monastery, he remembered that he had heard rumors of it and had it transcribed. Just as well he did, because that original also since vanished. Later, another early 9th century copy turned up somewhere else, and this copy now lies in a library about 200 meters away from where we are sitting today. When the newly rediscovered poem by Lucretius began to circulate in the Christian culture of the 16th and 17th centuries, its impact was nothing short of revolutionary. Stephen Greenblatt, his book, The Swerve, tells this story with gusto. Into a religious world governed by a personal God, into a philosophical world barricaded against materialism by centuries of Platonic Aristotelian arguments, came Lucretius to say, "You're deluding yourselves. The world is made of atoms, buzzing this way and that, without any particular interest in humans. No one is in charge." Even now, Lucretius has the power to excite. "This world," he wrote, "is the product of nature, the happenstance of the seeds of things colliding into each other by pure chance. In every possible way, no aim in view, at random, blind, till sooner or later certain atoms suddenly combined so that they lay the warp to weave the cloth of mighty things, of earth, of sky, of sea, of sky, of all the species of living things." I first read The Atomic Philosopher on the 4th of July, 2012. And inside the cover of my copy I wrote, "On this day, the Higgs boson is discovered, the ultimate particle in modern science." I wondered why it took me so long to discover this enchanting book. Science has largely come to think in Lucretian ways. the dance of those exceedingly tiny yet simple atoms bouncing around in empty space really does explain the entire observed world. Lucretius fulminates against mystification, against the idea that we must fear and obey supernatural forces we cannot understand. Like the Theoria in Plato, Lucretius urges his hearers to leave behind childish myths, but to observe and imitate nature, for knowledge drives out fear. Just as children shudder at everything in black of night, so sometimes things we are afraid of in the broad daylight are only bugbears, such as Tot's dread in a darkened room. And therefore we must scatter this terror of the mind, this gloom, not by the illuminations of the sun and his bright rays, but by observing nature's laws and looking on her face. The French humanist Montaigne read those parts of On the Nature of Things over and over. The copy of it from his personal library is full of annotations. Montaigne was tearing his hair out, knowing how to respond to the appalling religious violence between 16th century Catholics and Huguenots, and Lucretius gave him answers. Lucretius stood at the heart of Karl Marx's doctoral thesis. One scholar wrote that Marx saw in Lucretius a lever that might help to dislodge simplistic religious beliefs, a task he came to believe, with Feuerbach and the Hegelian left, to be among the most pressing of his own time. How much fearful ignorance in the world today is still in need of Lucretius. Think of the climate change denier burying his frightened head in the sand. Of the Indonesian Kiai who incites violence against homosexuals. Of the Burmese monk doing the same against a Muslim minority. Of Trump banning Muslims from entering his country. The number of theocracies around the world is not declining. The caliphate has an appeal that it has not had for 100 years. South Asia and our own Southeast Asia belong with Africa to the most believing parts of the world. The correlation between religiosity and poverty is positive and strong. Progressive politics in Indonesia have over the last 10 years had to concede huge territory to a conservative religious backlash, culminating last June in a sentence for Jakarta's governor Ahok for blasphemy. I finally abandoned the last remnants of my Christian belief while writing my Small Town Wars book about the Christian-Muslim wars in Maluku. All this is a betrayal of the universe and of life. Like the Theoros in Plato's Republic, we social scientists come into these religious societies as if we are aliens, as if demented. Yet Lucretius is by no means bleak. A passionate vitality lights up his poem from within. It opens with a highly erotic poem to the love that transfuses all of nature. All through the seas and mountains, torrents, leafy roofed abodes of birds and greening meadows, your delicious yearning goads the breast of every creature, and you urge all things you find lustily to get new generations of their kind, because alone you steer the nature of things upon its course. Immortality is a religious illusion, but even death has beauty. When we die, Lucretius says, our bodies, nurturer of our minds, dissolve into a myriad atoms. They scatter in the earth and the air, and our atoms are stardust. He writes, we all arise from seed celestial, because the same sky overhead is father of us all. Shakespeare loved Lucretius. He must have remembered this line when he had Juliet wish that after death, night should take her beloved Romeo and cut him out in little stars. and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night. I read that poem at my daughter's wedding, that's why it touches me. And this sense of wonder in Lucretius led the Italian novelist Italo Calvino to say that On the Nature of Things was the first great work of poetry in which knowledge of the world tends to dissolve the solidity of the world, leading to a perception of all that is infinitely minute, light, and mobile. So how do we live in this world that is buzz with random atomic motions? This takes us to Baruch Spinoza, Holland's most famous philosopher. His house in Rijnsburg, 20 minutes cycling away from here, is now a small museum. This is where between 1661 and 63 he started writing his magnum opus, Ethics. By day he ground lenses for Christian Huygens. In the evening he studied. He never had a family. One of the most remarkable things about Spinoza is that he dared to call his book Ethics. He knows as well as Lucretius did that we and the world are made of matter, and that there is no supreme legislator, judge, and father in the sky to tell us what to do. Yet he doesn't call his book something like metaphysical or metaphysics or ontology. No, he calls it ethics. Whatever the importance of his speculative propositions, he wants to say, you can only judge them at the level of the ethics that they imply. Lucretius didn't really believe in politics, and he had little to say about ethics, but for Spinoza, politics was the whole point. Gilles Deleuze, the exciting French philosopher who died in 1995, called Spinoza the Christ of the philosophers. Although few fully fathom his thought, everyone loves Spinoza. Some have likened the ethics to a musical work. Deleuze again. Writers, poets, musicians, filmmakers, painters too, even chance readers may find they are Spinozists. Indeed, such a thing is more likely for them than for professional philosophers. Many commentators have loved Spinoza sufficiently to evoke a wind when speaking of him. And in fact, no other comparison is adequate. His philosophy is too complex to talk about sensibly in a farewell speech dressed up as a credo, but I can lift out two basic elements and then reflect on what that means for our life together as humans, which includes the life of the Asian societies that we study. The most fundamental part of his philosophy is that the universe is a single, infinite, eternal, necessarily existing substance. He called it God or nature. Spinoza naturalizes God. Everything is part of nature. There is no God outside nature. There are no exceptions to the laws of nature. No supernatural being creates stuff out of nothing, sets the mechanism turning, intervenes in response to the prayers of the faithful, legislates what is and is not allowed morally, or sets to right what has been done wrong at the end of time. We are as much, no more, but also no less, part of the natural here and now as the animals. In this, Spinoza was no different to Lucretius. Yet just that part alone could have gotten Spinoza into serious trouble in 17th century Netherlands. Remember the lynching of the De Witt brothers. It can get you a jail sentence or a vigilante beating in Indonesia today. But there is more to Spinoza. This is his library. It's still there. The key to his ethics are the human passions. The whole of society, all of politics, hangs together relationally through the desires that people evoke in each other. The most fundamental human drive, writes Spinoza, is the striving to persevere in one's existence. In life, we have different kinds of encounters with other bodies. Good encounters empower us to persevere in our existence. These create passions of joy, love, collaborative research, democratic consultation, international cooperation. These are good encounters that strengthen our powers to persevere in our existence. Joy enables us to expand freely to the limits that nature sets on our existence. For true freedom is not living without limits, but learning to live along the grain of those natural limits. However, we also have bad encounters. These lead to passions of sadness, hate, envy, remorse, subservience to others, weaken our power to persevere in our existence. The rational individual will know how to distinguish good encounters from bad ones. Producing as many good encounters as possible helps everyone to persevere in their existence. What helps me helps everyone. Win-win. So what does this imply for politics? Spinoza was intensely interested in the politics of the Dutch Republic. As he wrote, the struggle deepened between a provincial Calvinist and Orangist public on the one hand, and an urban, secular, trading aristocracy on the other. In a highly political book he published during this struggle, the Theological Political Treatise, he effectively asked, as Deleuze put it, why are people so deeply irrational? Why are they so proud of their own enslavement? Why does a religion that evokes love and joy inspire war, intolerance, hatred, malevolence, and remorse? He feared that the religious monarchists would win, as indeed they did. And yet he never answered his own question by saying, I side with the secular Republicans. The threat of stupidity is too great. We will simply suppress those benighted provincials who want to set up an authoritarian democracy. Instead, he believed in democracy even in the worst of times. The effects of joy and sadness lie at the basis of all of Spinoza's politics. Ethics come about because humans who live this way realize it is to their and everyone else's advantage to work together. The joy of expanding does not permit envy or hate of others, nor the wish that they should not succeed. That would be a sad passion, an expression of weakness, the opposite of joy. Only joy is worthwhile. Joy takes pleasure in sharing the knowledge of nature one has acquired. Thus, free citizens agree together to build a republican state in which everyone is enabled to live in freedom. You sense now, I hope, why Spinoza is for me, as for so many, an inspiration for a better life today. It's a philosophy for a radical democracy in an age of right-wing populism. It's also a philosophy for radical cosmopolitanism in an era of growing nationalist and religious chauvinism. And by no means an afterthought, it is a philosophy for a deep ecology in an era of climate change disaster. The relations upon which Spinoza builds his ethics also embrace non-human entities, for nothing distinguishes us from these non-human dimensions of nature. The amor intellectualis Dei, the intellectual love of God or nature that suffuses Spinoza, the joyful passions that drive his ethics, these bring us back to Bertrand Russell. The good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. They're a long way removed from Max Weber's barren Entzauberung, the sober scientific disenchantment that separates our world from the religious fantasies of pre-modern times. We have come full circle. Let me just step back over the 3 stops that we have made in my quest to reunite myself with the social science work that I do. At each stop, some blockage was overcome that stood in the way. In Plato's Republic, I discovered theory. Truth, true knowledge, does not come through revelation from beyond this world, neither does it come from some body of truth existing by itself outside the human theoros, as positivists have long said. It comes only through the observing action of the theoros, who engages in passionate, sympathetic contemplation. It is an act filled with a sense of wonder. In Lucretius' On the Nature of Things, I saw the materiality of nature. The blockage Lucretius removed was the one I had inherited from the Christian Middle Ages, which says that obedience always comes first, that, as one Catholic teaching has it, curiosity is sometimes damaging. I really am made of so many atoms whose electrons, protons, neutrons and whatever else are exactly like those that make up the stars. Nature is the horizon of our field and also in the social sciences. And there is poetry in this too, as we saw. From Spinoza's ethics I learned that a good life, an emancipative politics for our society and in our environment is possible within this plane of immanence that is God or nature. The blockage here are the sad passions that litter this world. Such passions lead to bad encounters marked by hate and envy. Instead, rational understanding privileges good encounters. It incentivizes political action that compounds our relations with others rather than decomposing them. This empowers both myself and those with whom I come into contact. Now the farewells, even if they're not final. I started work at KITLV on the 18th of November 2002 at Henk Schulte-Nothol's invitation. He had moved into his office exactly a week earlier, and the little research division that we started grew and eventually gobbled up the entire institute. Since then, I've come to know probably hundreds of scholars here and around the world. The invisible community of those who strive for truth, beauty, and justice, as Einstein said. What a life we lead. Spinoza will not allow me to use the word envy, but I can say for a fact that many colleagues outside the KITLV are blue with it. Hours, months, years of thinking, reading, writing, discussing, visiting the field, room 138, followed by the Grote Beer, like Plato's alcohol-soaked symposia. I had no idea a researcher's job involved so much exotic traveling, learning from Indonesians, from Burmese, from Canadians, Australians, living like a stranger, like a theoros, all good encounters. I have to skip over the sweat expended by the half marathoners, the rowers, the jazz dancers, and the ping pong tournament players in this institute. I have to skip over the love matches that blossomed and sometimes faded again. I have to skip over the annual wrestle with the demountable Christmas tree while Frida's cooked up another culinary extravaganza for 35 places. I can't mention the old reading room right below us, where Rini and Josephine watched jealously over their collection, and where you could meet a Helen Kreese or a famous Indonesian without warning. But I must mention 4 individuals and one group who have been especially important to me. For each of them, I've chosen a picture which I will carry with me in my head. Wart Bierenschoot, unbelievable as it seems, where are you? I can't see you. My first email exchange with you goes back only 10 years. To congratulate you on the birth of Cas and set up our first discussion. I had been most impressed with your dissertation, and today you are my closest colleague and my friend. The rate at which you think up new projects grows faster each year, or maybe I'm slowing down. For you, a picture you already know because I gave it to you for your 40th last year. It is J.M.W. Turner's Apollo and Python, done in 1811 to represent the Enlightenment, the beardless one who strives against chaos, inaction, and death. Henk Scholt-Nothold, you made it all happen. How can I thank you enough? You've been a good boss, tough when reports are not in, ready to shoot for the moon to finance a good research idea. Your old boy networking skills are legendary. With Margreet, I don't see her, there she is, at Burgemeester Boreelstraat, the most generous host and hostess I know. But mostly I will remember the good cheer. Many a looming fight seemed to blow over when Henk made a joke about it. So, the Laughing Cavalier from Haarlem, of course. Fortuitously also reminds me of something else, the cavalier manner in which finances were invariably calculated, rounded off to the nearest 2,000 euros on the back of an envelope, which 2 years later would trigger rage amongst the accountants. Dear Yaya Seegers, nothing illustrates the power of woman in general and the power of Yaya Seegers over her philosophers in this institute in particular than this 1523 wood carving that I saw in Munich recently. The story was popular in the Middle Ages. The philosopher Aristotle, the greatest male intellect in the world, arrives at court to teach the young Alexander the Great. He warns Alexander's father against the dangers of feminine wiles. But, emotionally clumsy as he is, he ends up himself falling under the spell of that man's mistress, Phyllis, and doing her bidding. This not only illustrates how many people are secretly a bit in love with Yaya, but also the extent to which we are all dependent on you for most of the important practical things in our lives. Mutatis mutandis, the same could be said of Ellen, Jeanette, Christian, Vanessa, but I think you get the point. Next, the group. These are my PhD students. Hoko, Fajri is here, I think, Grace, Vita, and in Indonesia, Prio, Retna, and Zamzam. Don't worry, this is not a goodbye. You are all super bright. Life is more fun with you than without you. I see you all like this, pensive, a little pale from lack of sleep, with the pen hovering over the half-written paper. I do hope you will live longer than Reverend son Titus did. Finally, my wife of 42 years, Gerry van Klinken, my lover, my traveling mate, my running companion, my Tove, my Isolde, my Aunt True Love, my bride. A good encounter. What more can I say? Thank you very much.